On a rainy afternoon in early 2025, the streets of Manila are alive with the usual noise of jeepneys, vendors, and hurried footsteps. Yet one man stands still. His name is Reza Farhadi, a distinguished professor from Tehran, a man in his 50s known across Iran for his brilliance and eloquence, a man his students once saw as a beacon of hope. But here, in this unexpected city far from home, a single tear slides down his cheek. For years, Reza carried himself with pride, with the weight of responsibility on his shoulders, convinced that his role was to guide a generation drowning in despair. In Tehran, he had faced lecture halls overflowing with eager faces that slowly dimmed under the pressure of conflict, disillusionment, and the quiet loss of dreams. He was admired, even revered, but admiration could not stop him from witnessing that loss again and again. Now in the heart of Manila, surrounded by strangers, he feels something unfamiliar stirring within him. Why is this man, who once stood so firmly in the storms of his homeland, suddenly vulnerable, emotional, undone by a foreign land he never planned to visit? The answer, though not yet clear to him, lies hidden in a quiet migration that has brought thousands of Iranians to these streets, to these schools, to this place where hope seems to breathe again. In this moment, beneath the falling rain, Reza's journey begins. In a modest school district of Quezon City, something remarkable is unfolding, quietly and without headlines. Here, classrooms are filled with young Iranians who seem almost reborn. They speak Tagalog with surprising ease, laugh freely with their Filipino classmates, and move through the day with a kind of lightness that feels worlds away from the weight of Tehran. To the casual observer, it may look ordinary, just another day in a bustling Manila neighborhood. But for Reza Farhadi, it is deeply unsettling. Back home in Iran, his lecture halls were crowded with students desperate to learn, their notebooks filled with theories, and their hearts once brimming with ambition. Yet over the years, he watched that light fade. Every semester, hope seemed to drain from their faces, not only under the strain of politics and restrictions, but from something more devastating, a slow erosion of dreams. Reza carried that heaviness within him, believing he had no answer to offer, no way to restore the spark that kept slipping away. And yet here, thousands of miles from home, he finds the same young Iranians transformed. They are no longer bowed by disillusionment, but energized, blending with their Filipino peers in ways that feel almost impossible. Reza wonders, why the Philippines? To the outside world, this nation is often overlooked, seen as fragile or struggling. But to these students, it has become a sanctuary, a place where laughter is not restrained, where trust seems natural, where the future feels attainable. What draws them here is not simply education or opportunity, but something harder to name, something Reza himself cannot yet define. He did not come to Manila on a whim. His journey began with a cryptic message from a former student, a student he remembered as solemn and withdrawn, someone who once carried the same weight as the others. The email had been brief, almost startling in its simplicity. "Professor, I found hope, and it's not where I expected." Those words echoed in his mind until he could no longer ignore them. Now, standing in this unexpected place, surrounded by the sound of youthful laughter and Tagalog phrases rolling off Iranian tongues, he begins to realize that what is happening here is more than a change of location. It is a quiet migration of spirit, one that has eluded the world's attention, but has already begun to alter lives. When Reza's plane touched down at Ninoy Aquino International Airport, he braced himself for the chaos he had been warned about. Manila, he imagined, would greet him with confusion, crowded halls, and the sharp edge of poverty that so many outsiders described. Instead, what met him was startling in its simplicity. At the immigration counter, a Filipino officer looked over his documents, then paused, lifted his eyes, and offered a gentle smile. "Welcome to your second home, Professor," the man said warmly, as if he had known Reza for years. The words were unexpected, almost disarming, and they echoed in his mind long after he stepped past the counter. It was not the stamp on his passport that mattered, but the quiet sense of belonging that came with those few simple words. As he made his way through the city, he kept expecting the weight of disappointment to fall, but instead a surprising calm took its place. On the campus of the University of the Philippines, the shock deepened. Walking slowly under the wide acacia trees, Reza saw them, his own people, young Iranian students, gathered in circles, their faces alive with energy. They switched between Tagalog and English with ease, trading jokes with Filipino classmates, their eyes bright with the kind of joy he had not seen in years. These were the same young men and women who once sat silently in Tehran's lecture halls, burdened by a future they could not imagine. And yet here, thousands of miles away, they were laughing without hesitation, standing taller, unafraid. Reza stood watching, uncertain of what he felt. Was it envy? Relief? Or perhaps something deeper, a faint stirring of peace that unsettled him even more than despair had? He realized with a quiet start that his own skepticism was beginning to crack. The world he thought he understood, its borders, its divisions, its certainties, was shifting. In the laughter of his students, in the warmth of strangers, Manila was offering him something he had not expected. Not answers, not solutions, but the possibility of healing. Reza's days in Manila unfolded not with grand revelations, but with the smallest of encounters. Moments so ordinary that they might have been overlooked. Yet it was in these simple exchanges that his heart began to shift. One evening he stopped near a sari-sari store tucked along a narrow street. There he saw an elderly Filipino woman leaning gently toward a young Iranian student who stumbled over a Tagalog phrase. With infinite patience, she repeated the words slowly, her voice soft and encouraging. When the boy finally managed to say it correctly, she chuckled, slipped an extra piece of candy into his hand and said, "You try. Very good." The boy beamed, and Reza, watching from a short distance, felt something tighten in his chest. In Tehran, kindness had grown cautious, measured, often weighed against risk. Here it seemed to flow without hesitation, as natural as breathing. A few days later, he wandered past an elementary school playground. The sound of children's laughter drew him closer, and there he saw another scene that unsettled him with its innocence. A small group of Filipino children surrounded an Iranian boy, coaching him through simple Tagalog words. Each time he got one right, they clapped their hands, cheering as if he had achieved something extraordinary. The boy's shy smile widened with every attempt, and the children's joy seemed boundless. Reza stood still, his mind turning back to the weary faces of students in Iran, their shoulders heavy with worry. Here, even children seemed to carry a power he had underestimated, the power to lift, to welcome, to teach without judgment. It struck him then, with an almost painful clarity, that what he envied was not material comfort or even freedom in the political sense. What unsettled him was the purity of connection, the way strangers could embrace one another without suspicion, without fear. These small moments, humble and unremarkable on the surface, were quietly rewriting his understanding of dignity and compassion. For the first time in years, he felt his guarded heart beginning to open. One afternoon, as the sun dipped and the city's noise softened, Reza found himself drawn toward a small Catholic church. He hesitated at the door, unsure of what had compelled him to enter. As a Muslim, the setting was foreign, even unfamiliar, but something about the quiet hum of prayer and the gentle glow of candles pulled him in. The air inside was still, heavy with reverence, yet welcoming in a way that surprised him. He took a seat in the back, careful not to disturb the silence, and let his eyes wander across the pews. There, a few rows ahead, he noticed Kavi, one of his former students. The young man was kneeling, head bowed, his lips moving in silent prayer. Beside him sat an elderly Filipino woman, her rosary beads slipping steadily through her fingers. At one moment, she reached over and placed her hand lightly on Kavi's, a gesture of quiet solidarity. They did not speak. They did not need to. Their faiths, though different, found a common language in that simple act of shared humanity. Reza felt his breath catch. For years, he had lectured on philosophy, on the meaning of dignity, on the complexities of culture and faith. Yet never had he witnessed something so unassuming and so profound. This was no debate, no theory, no argument to be won or lost. It was acceptance, pure and unguarded. In that silence, he realized that kindness itself could be revolutionary, that humility could dissolve barriers where pride had built walls. Sitting in the dim glow of the church, Reza felt a peace he had not known in decades. The intellectual armor he had carried for so long seemed to fall away, replaced by something softer, something he could not yet name. For the first time, he understood that he was not here to explain or to guide, but to witness, and in witnessing, to be changed. On a warm Sunday morning, Reza returned to the same church, not as a hesitant visitor this time, but as someone drawn back by a quiet need. The pews were filled with Filipino families, their voices rising together in prayer. He took a seat near the side, blending into the crowd, when he saw Cave again, no longer kneeling in silence but standing at the front. The timid student he remembered from Tehran now faced the congregation with a calm confidence. Cave began to speak, his voice steady though tinged with emotion. In Iran, I was taught that pride means holding tightly to our beliefs, never letting go, he said, his eyes sweeping across the room. But here I found a different kind of pride. A pride that opens its arms, a pride in compassion. The words lingered in the air, simple yet powerful, and Reza felt them strike against his own unspoken doubts. Their eyes met across the church. In that brief exchange, no words were needed. Reza saw in his student what he himself had long searched for. Courage not born from resistance, but from release. After the service, beneath the shade of a mango tree outside, Reza approached him. The question came quietly, almost like a confession. How did you find such courage? Cave placed a hand on his chest, his gaze unwavering. Here, I am free, in my heart. The answer was not philosophical, not academic, but it carried more truth than any lecture Reza had ever given. The word freedom struck him deeply. He had written about it, debated it, even defended it in classrooms filled with eager listeners. But he had never truly felt it. Not until now. Not until this moment under the mango tree, where his student taught him something no book ever could. In the weeks that followed, Manila no longer felt like a stopover for Reza, but like the beginning of something unexpected. Invitations came from the university, and soon he found himself standing in front of a lecture hall once more. This time, though, the faces looking back at him were different. A mix of Iranian and Filipino students filled the room, their notebooks open, their eyes eager, not with the weight of expectation, but with a sense of possibility. Reza spoke slowly, choosing his words with care. We did not come here for education alone, he began, his voice steady yet touched with emotion. We came seeking humanity, connection, qualities this nation offers so abundantly. A quiet murmur ran through the hall, and then a wave of gentle applause rose. Not thunderous, not forced, but sincere. For Reza, it was unlike anything he had experienced before. Each day he taught, he found himself not only giving, but also receiving. From the Filipino students, he learned patience and warmth. From his Iranian students, he saw resilience renewed. The boundaries he had once drawn so firmly between teacher and student, between Iranian and Filipino, began to blur. He no longer felt like a visitor observing from the outside. He was part of this place, part of this quiet transformation. One evening, as he prepared notes for the next class, he realized that his purpose had shifted. He was not here simply to explain ideas or analyze texts. He was here to build bridges, to connect two worlds that had seemed so distant. The decision settled in his heart with surprising clarity. He would stay. Manila was no longer just a city he had traveled to. It had become a home, a space where he could finally live the values he had only spoken about before. And in that realization, Reza felt something he had nearly given up on, a future he wanted to claim. By the time the rainy season returned, Reza had become more than a visiting professor. He was a familiar figure on campus, a mentor not only to Iranians, but to Filipino students who looked to him for guidance. Yet his role was never about authority. It was about presence, about listening, about sharing the dignity he had discovered in the smallest gestures of Manila life. At a university gathering, he was asked to give a closing address. Standing before the crowd, Reza did not raise his voice or lean on grand rhetoric. He spoke plainly, his words carrying a weight that came not from force, but from lived truth. The greatness of the Philippines does not lie in power, he said, pausing as his eyes swept across the audience. It lies in quiet compassion, in the dignity with which people here treat one another. If the world seeks peace, it must look here. The hall fell into a deep silence, then broke into a warm applause. In that moment, Reza felt something shift within him. He was no longer only a professor, no longer only a man burdened by the disappointments of his homeland. He was a bridge between two cultures, a witness to the possibility of change that begins not with governments or institutions, but with human kindness. The tear he had shed on his first day in Manila returned to his memory, but now he understood it differently. It was not sorrow that had moved him then, but gratitude waiting to surface. Gratitude for a land underestimated by many, yet rich in the power of connection. Gratitude for a people who welcomed strangers as family. News of his work spread quietly, inspiring more Iranians to follow, to seek the same refuge of hope. And as the years ahead stretched before him, Reza knew that his legacy would not be measured by titles or accolades. It would be measured by the lives touched, the bridges built, and the truth he carried forward. That strength does not always roar. It can also whisper, and in that whisper, change the world.